Welcome back to the deep dive. And today, well, we are staring down the barrel of a warning that, honestly, is the kind of thing that really keeps you up at night.
It really is.
We're looking at the stark, really alarming declaration from the highest levels of NATO, and the message. Europe simply cannot defend itself alone.
It's a sobering assessment, to say the least.
Yeah.
The whole premise is just so blunt. Without the United States, the continent is vulnerable.
Yeah. And we aren't just, pulling this out of thin air. We're diving into a stack of sources that are all centered around a brutally honest analysis. It involves the former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte and current NATO strategic assessments. It's a reality check that feels like a splash of ice-cold water.
It does. And what's so fascinating about this analysis is it goes way beyond the usual headlines. You know, the stuff about budget deficits or political fights.
Right.
This reveals a military dependency that is much deeper and much more physical than I think most people realize.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack 3 hidden realities that these sources expose. First, we're going to look at a shocking industrial weakness, basically, why money just can't buy safety.
Okay.
Second, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, a paradoxical relationship with Donald Trump that actually changed the alliance.
A very paradoxical relationship. Yeah.
And finally, we're heading north to a freezing cold front line that is heating up fast, the Arctic.
I mean, it is the definition of realpolitik. These declarations don't exist in a vacuum. They're surfacing at a moment of, well, maximum global tension. Everyone's talking about European strategic autonomy, but the sources suggest that concept just crashes headfirst into a very hard reality.
A reality check, indeed. So let's just jump into the hook here. I mean, the central warning is tough. One of the sources quotes a top official saying effectively that a purely European defense force would complicate things, and that, quote, Putin would love it, so think again.
Wow.
That doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room, does it?
No, it really doesn't. It's a complete dismissal of the idea that Europe can go it alone anytime soon.
But here's where I get stuck, and I think a lot of you might feel the same. When we talk about this dependency, what are we actually talking about? Because I look at Europe and I see these incredibly powerful economies. I see high-tech armies, cutting-edge technology. It's not like the cupboard is bare, right?
And that is the paradox. On the surface, it looks robust. But the sources point out that the problem isn't located in the military headquarters or even in the bank accounts.
Okay.
It's located in the industrial parks. The dependency is, above all, material and logistical.
Okay, let's unpack this. The source used the aid to Ukraine as the perfect case study. I saw the number. The European Union mobilized a gigantic package, something like 90 billion euros.
Correct. The financial mobilization was historic, no question.
So the political will is there. The money is there. Why are we saying they're defenseless?
Because, and this is the hard truth from our materials, the European defense industry. It currently cannot provide even a fraction of what Ukraine actually needs on a daily basis to defend itself.
That is wild. You have 90 billion euros, but you can't turn it into shells?
Precisely. The analysis highlights that this isn't due to a lack of knowledge or technology. It's a structural issue. For decades, European production lines have been optimized for peacetime.
Optimized for peacetime. What does that actually mean on the factory floor?
It means they're designed to manufacture short runs of very sophisticated, very expensive systems. Think of fighter jets, advanced frigates.
The Ferraris.
The Ferrari equivalent of military hardware, exactly. They are not set up for the mass production and sustained output of attrition material.
Like 155 millimeter artillery ammunition?
That's the one.
Right, so they can build a handful of incredible machines, but they can't churn out the basic stuff that a conflict like the one in Ukraine just devours by the thousands every single day.
Exactly. It's a volume problem.
But hold on. We're talking about Europe. I mean, home of Airbus, BAE Systems, these massive industrial giants. Why can't they just pivot? I keep thinking about those World War II documentaries where car factories started making tanks in a few months. Why can't they just flip a switch?
That is the intuition, I know. But the sources explain why that's an illusion today. The key factors are time and complexity.
Right.
Reactivating or building a mass production line for modern ammunition isn't like repurposing a 1940s assembly line. It takes years, not months.
Years.
The sources suggest reindustrialization at this scale is a decade-long project.
A decade, wow.
Yeah. You need specific machinery that hasn't been built in years. You need to rebuild supply chains that were abandoned because they weren't efficient in peacetime.
Yeah.
And you need qualified personnel.
So the skill set just isn't there anymore.
It was allowed to atrophy. I mean, that peace dividend everyone enjoyed for the last 30 years meant scaling down that heavy industrial capacity.
And I saw the industry's fragmented too, right?
Very. Every country protects its own national champion company, which just creates duplication and inefficiency.
So the takeaway here is that you can write a check for 90 billion euros today, but you can't write a check for time.
Money cannot buy time. That is the critical lesson.
Yeah.
The hardware problem is a lag problem. Even with all the will and all the cash, the factories are physically unable to meet the demand right now.
And that's the dependency.
That is why the dependency on the U.S., who never fully dismantled that mass capacity, is so acute.
That puts the defenseless comment into a terrifyingly clear perspective. It's not an insult. It's a math problem.
Exactly. It's a weakness of physics, not just politics.
Okay, speaking of politics, this brings us to the second part of our deep dive. And this is where the script really flips. You'd think, given how vulnerable Europe is, the last person they'd want to talk about is Donald Trump.
Right.
He was the guy calling NATO obsolete, threatening to leave.
And yet, if you look at the analysis of Mark Rutte's stance and the general NATO strategic assessment in these documents, there is a surprising amount of, well, praise for Donald Trump.
It feels like a contradiction of manual proportions. How do you square Europe is vulnerable with Trump was actually good for us?
It comes down to pragmatism over personality. Rutte, who is often cited in these sources as this key figure in navigating it all.
The Trump whisperer.
The Trump whisperer, essentially. He's portrayed as managing that relationship better than almost anyone else.
Okay.
The analysis admits that Trump's style caused what they call existential panic in Brussels. But they also recognize a cold calculation. Trump's aggressive pressure. It worked.
It worked.
In terms of the bottom line, yes.
Yeah.
The sources point to specific countries, Spain, Belgium, Canada. These nations were lagging way behind on their defense spending commitments.
Right, the 2% target.
The 2% target. The analysis suggests they would likely not have increased their spending to near that target without Trump's undiplomatic threats.
So the polite diplomatic notes from previous administrations didn't move the needle, but Trump threatened to flip the table did.
That's the argument. It's described as transactional diplomacy. You might not like the partner, you might hate the rhetoric, but if the transaction yields a stronger, better-funded alliance,
You legitimize the method.
you legitimize the method.
That's a bitter pill for a lot of diplomats to swallow, I bet. Validating the idea that bullying your allies gets results.
It is uncomfortable. The sources acknowledge the risk. I mean, legitimizing a figure who questioned the very existence of the alliance is dangerous.
Sure.
But they are operating in a world of realpolitik. The result, a NATO with better burden sharing, is what matters to the strategist.
It's results over shared values, almost.
Or at least prioritizing survival mechanics over diplomatic niceties.
And nothing illustrates that survival mechanics mindset better than the story about Greenland. This is one of my favorite parts of the research stack because it was just so bizarre when it happened.
The Greenland incident?
Oh, yeah, right. Do you remember where you were when you heard Trump wanted to buy Greenland? I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a late-night social media typo.
Most of the world did. But the sources emphasize that in the corridors of power, nobody was laughing. It was a diplomatic crisis of the first order.
Yeah, the Danish prime minister called it absurd.
And Trump took huge offense to that word. He canceled his state visit. He saw it as a personal slight.
Of course.
But for the Danes and the rest of Europe, it was seen as a lack of respect for sovereignty, treating an ally like a real estate listing.
For sale, one strategic island. So how did they fix this? Because we aren't talking about a real estate deal anymore. We're talking about a real rift in the alliance.
This is where Rutte's mediation comes back into the story. The sources detail how, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, he helped negotiate a way for everyone to save face.
Diplomatic CPR.
Exactly. But here's the aha moment of this entire episode. That crisis wasn't just about smoothing over a gaffe.
Okay.
It forced NATO to look at why Trump was looking at Greenland.
It wasn't just because he wanted to put a hotel there.
No, it was a catalyst. The absurdity of the purchase offer masked a very real strategic necessity. The incident forced NATO to acknowledge that the Arctic is no longer just a block of ice, it's a new front line.
This connects us to the third reality, the Arctic shift. Because while we were all laughing at the Greenland headline, the map was changing.
The map is being redrawn by melting ice. The sources paint a very concerning picture of what is happening up north. Russia has reoccupied and reopened dozens of Soviet-era military bases along its Arctic coast.
Reopened, so they are literally dusting off the Cold War infrastructure.
And modernizing it. They possess the world's largest fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers. They consider the Northern Sea route almost as their internal waters. They're militarizing the ice.
And it's not just Russia, right? I saw a term in the notes that made me do a double take. Near Arctic state.
Yes, that is China's self-designation, which is geographically creative, to say the least.
Considering they aren't near the Arctic at all.
Not particularly. But they are building what they call a polar Silk Road. They are investing heavily in ports, research stations, and infrastructure in the region.
And let me guess, these research stations aren't just for studying polar bears.
Your point stands. The sources warn about dual use. A port built for commercial shipping can be used for naval logistics. A research station studying atmospheric conditions can also monitor satellite communications.
Or submarine movement.
Or submarine movements.
So the Greenland incident, weird as it was, acted as a wake-up call. NATO realized, hey, we are completely exposed up here.
Precisely. The alliance had historically looked east toward the Soviet Union and then Russia in Europe. Now they are forced to look north. The Arctic is becoming a commercial superhighway because of climate change.
And a major security vulnerability.
Simultaneously.
And the sources mentioned that Root had to walk a very fine line here during the cleanup of the Greenland mess.
He did. There's a specific quote where he clarifies he had no mandate to negotiate sovereignty for Denmark, which highlights the delicate balance of leading NATO. You can push for a strategic shift. We need to focus on the Arctic. But you cannot negotiate the land of your member states.
It really emphasizes that NATO isn't a single country. It's a committee of nations with their own egos and borders.
A committee that is suddenly realizing the board game has expanded.
So let's try to pull all this together. We started with a warning about Europe being defenseless, and we've uncovered 3 layers to that problem.
Right. Layer 1 is the industrial illusion. Europe has money and tech, but it lacks the factories and supply chains for mass production. It is a physical inability to generate hardware quickly.
Layer 2, the Trump paradox. We learned that diplomacy has become transactional. The alliance accepted a bull in a china shop because ultimately he got the china shop to pay its insurance premiums.
Correct. The fear he instilled achieved results that polite requests hadn't.
And layer 3, the Arctic shift. The map has physically changed, the ice is melting, and in its place we have a new theater of competition with Russia and China, sparked by the weirdest real estate offer in history.
It shows how interconnected these things are. The industrial weakness makes the alliance more dependent on the U.S. That dependency forces Europe to tolerate transactional diplomacy from U.S. leaders. And that U.S. leadership is pivoting the entire alliance toward new threats, like the Arctic.
It really dismantles the idea that defense is just about buying a few tanks. It's about economics, it's about psychology, and it's about geography.
And it brings us back to that initial warning. If Putin would love it, if Europe tries to go it alone, it's because he knows these 3 realities better than anyone.
Right.
He knows that the factories aren't ready, he knows the political friction, and he knows he has the advantage in the Arctic.
That is a heavy realization. It's not just a headline, it's a systemic vulnerability.
It is. And it leaves you, the listener, with a very difficult proposition.
Which leads us to our final thought for today. We've talked about what is in the sources, but I want to leave you with a question that lingers after reading all this. Everyone in Europe talks about strategic autonomy, the ability to stand on their own 2 feet.
It is the buzzword of the decade.
But based on what we've learned today about the 10-year lag to build factories, about the reliance on American pressure to even spend money, is Europe actually ready for the psychological shift that requires?
That is the question. It is one thing to write a check. It is another thing to completely rewire your society, to prioritize security in a way you haven't had to do for 80 years.
Because you lived under the American umbrella.
Exactly.
Are they ready to accept that safety isn't a guarantee anymore, but a product they have to manufacture themselves, effectively starting from scratch?
It requires a cultural revolution, not just a budgetary one.
A cultural revolution in the face of melting ice and hostile neighbors. Something to chew on. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.